and welcome back to the Manifestation Destination. I'm Melissa Marie. If you're new, hi, it's good to have you, and if you're returning, it's great to see you again. So to kind of tell a little bit of a secret, today is actually January 13th, 2021. And I am definitely late to the game to wish you guys a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope that you guys did have a good holiday season, whatever you may have celebrated. I know that Christmas and other holiday get-togethers were definitely impacted by the pandemic, and unfortunately here in January 2021 we're still dealing with the pandemic and COVID, but I just wanted to wish you guys a happy holiday season even though they're really late. My bad. So part of the reason why I've taken a little bit of a break was the fact that I wasn't feeling very creative. And because of that, I didn't want to create any videos out of obligation, and I didn't want to create any videos that I didn't put my heart into. So I've taken my break that I've needed, and I've kind of gathered some thoughts. I have some ideas for the upcoming year. And I definitely have some goals laid out, which is actually going to be in a following video. So lucky for you guys, you get to hear about my goals and manifestations for 2021 in a later video. But today, if you've read the title, today is all about 2020 from both a global perspective and my personal perspective. I apologize for the background noise. I am actually in my family's business right now. It's too cold to film outside. Right now our house is a wreck because we still have Christmas decorations up. Bear with me with the background noise. I will try to knock it down for you guys. That way you're not hearing as much utility sounds in the background. So, sorry. One thing to kind of give you guys a heads up. I am not good with remembering timelines. I'm not good with time, so I apologize if I'm way off for a lot of these different milestones in 2020. That's my bad. I know that looking back, it feels like forever ago. So please have patience with me, and we'll try to bear through all of the timelines together. Without further ado, here is my perspective as well as the global perspective of 2020. So the first thing that I remember in 2020 was the koala habitats burning in Australia. And I don't know a whole lot of the details. Being in America, yes, we did hear about it in the news, and we did hear about some of the details. I can't remember all of the news stories or how long that period lasted. Because I know here in America, our news kind of switched gears pretty quickly a lot during 2020. So I remember the koala habitats burning, and I remember a lot of Facebook news feeds coming through, as well as donation opportunities through Facebook and all of that. So that kind of set off the year. So unfortunately, the next thing that I remember in 2020 was similar in California as to Australia. So there were a lot of wildfires in the western part of the United States that we ended up getting notified about throughout the entire country. Those are like the two first things that I kind of remember about 2020 prior to the biggest news story, which would be COVID. No one's gonna really easily forget about 2020 because it affected everyone. There have been a lot of deaths in regard to the pandemic, but fortunately for us, the recovery rates are also very high. I think the first major thing with COVID in 2020 for us Americans would have been in March when we had that initial shutdown. There were a whole lot of restrictions. Restaurants and bars were temporarily shut down. Another was that people were encouraged to only go out for necessary supplies. A lot of people lost their jobs and ended up applying for welfare. And a lot of people ended up only going to work if they were considered essential workers. That shutdown was not easy in the slightest. A lot of goods in the stores had gone, I won't say extinct, but they were very hard to find. And that was a huge issue throughout the entire United States, not just on a local level. Part of that is because people were hoarding the supplies. We did receive a stimulus check, which is the first time in my life I've ever experienced or even heard about such a thing. Governor DeWine was definitely trying to be proactive when it came to the virus. And because of how proactive he was trying to be, I personally had the concern that they were going to shut down again in Thanksgiving, which thankfully they did not. Thankfully, by the end of 2020, vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, and I think there was another one, I don't know, that's bad, but Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine were definitely approved and were recommended to go forward in an emergency situation. So then, of course, like around COVID time, there was also talk of killer hornets, which thank God that wasn't a thing. I hate bugs, and knowing that there could have been a giant hornet thing that could have stung me and killed me did not make me happy. Obviously, the news did not make a big hubbub about it, but honestly, the biggest thing that was in 2020 news was COVID related. And then, of course, we can't forget that 2020 was also an election year to top everything off. 2020's election was polarized so much. It definitely highlighted that right now we are going through a lot of stuff as a country. So that was 2020 global perspective. Now I kind of want to take a look at my 2020 experience. So January 2020, it was a very impactful month in my life. And from a very personal perspective, it definitely served as a catalyst for how my entire year was going to go. Little did I know then. So to kind of preempt that, I think it's important for you guys to kind of know what led up to January 2020 for me. Around Christmas time of 2019, I had experienced a lot of bleeding as I was on my period, and it didn't stop. I can remember Christmas was pretty bad. I was in a pretty bad place around Christmas because I wouldn't stop bleeding, and this is the first time that I had had this type of scenario happened to me. Naturally, it's not normal to continue to bleed after several weeks. It freaked me out. It was my first big health scare that I've ever had. For those who don't know me, I actually have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. I had convinced myself that I had cervical cancer by, I think it was around January 20th, I had finally given in to going to a doctor to kind of confront what all of this stuff was. And thankfully, the doctor, I don't think officially diagnosed me with this, but based on all of the symptoms, he basically said that it was most likely polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS. Prior to even being in 2020, I had gotten myself to a point where I was not very happy with the way I looked, the way that I felt. Career-wise, I was not happy, and being a 25-year-old, 24-year-old, and being this sad and unhappy with my life, I mean, how sad. I was in my prime. And I was so sad all the time. I didn't like how I looked. I ate like crap. And part of the health scare that I was experiencing, I was also putting blame on myself. That I hadn't taken care of my body, that I hadn't made good choices for myself. And now, because I made such bad choices, I was suffering with the consequences. Yet again, this moment in time basically served as a catalyst for how I was going to live my 2020. And I had made a vow to myself walking out of that doctor's office. I was going to start taking care of myself, and I was going to start treating myself with respect. and I was gonna start making good choices for myself. And honestly, January was that start. I ended up starting to eat less. I ate foods that were better for me, or I didn't eat as much. And I would also limit pop. I ended up drinking a lot more water. And one thing that did come out of that entire experience, I say it because I literally got one every day, which isn't good because there's still sugar in it. Mind you, I did ask for less sugar than what it normally comes with, so I wasn't completely bad. But I basically discovered Starbucks peach sweet tea. So I would order it a black tea with peach juice, and it was wonderful, and that was my treat for the day. And on top of the health perspective of my vow, I also vowed that I just wanted to be happier. I didn't have any friends. I wasn't socializing with anyone. I would literally wake up in the morning. I would go to work until 5 p.m. I would come to the shop. Maybe I would feel like interacting with some of our kids here at the shop. But other than that, I was on my computer. I was zoning out the world. I didn't want to have anything to do with anyone. And by 9 o'clock, we finally were able to go home. If it wasn't the summer, if it was the summer, it was more like 10 o'clock or 10:30 that we were able to go home. I would go home, look at my phone, maybe watch a little bit of TV and go straight to bed. And I was not living in a happy place at all. So I vowed to myself that I was going to try to start making a life for myself that I enjoyed. When February rolled around, I can't really remember all of the details of February, but I know that I kept up with the lifestyle change, so I was still watching what I put into my body. Around that time, there might have been some talk of COVID in China, maybe 1 or 2 cases here in America, but it was just rumblings and it wasn't full blown yet. So February was still pretty normal for me, and it was almost a little bit better for me because of the lifestyle change. So March rolled around and I was still watching what I put into my body. I was still focusing on putting some fruits and veggies and drinking water, and of course my sweet tea. And that's when everything kind of happened with COVID, was in March. And on a personal level, being obsessive compulsive the way that I am, I was very panicky at the very beginning because I started to finally realize how big the pandemic was, and realizing how out of control I was, which was yet again another huge factor in my panic. We had the shutdown, and I'd say for a week I was probably pretty overwhelmed with all of the mental health stuff that came with the shutdown. I remember watching the news, and they basically explained that Ohio was shutting down and that you were only encouraged to go out for the necessary supplies. And it sucked, to say the least. I was so worried that I or my family or get symptoms and become symptomatic, and obviously being obsessive compulsive, we tend to jump overboard. But I was so scared to death that me or my family were gonna die because of it. And I had like one big meltdown where I just like sobbed in the office of the shop here. But thankfully, I kind of picked myself up. I had to deal with it in the perspective of me being an employee. And I was still working my previous job before working at the shop. Being in the position that I was considered essential for multiple reasons. So naturally, I didn't have the ability to work from home. Other people from work were given the option to do that, but I was not, which made me more panicky and more scared because I would have continued contact with people coming in to my place of employment on a regular basis. Thankfully, the employment place that I did work for did shut down to the public, so it was pretty much just me and a handful of employees. in the place at one time, which was great. And I basically kept my distance to try to do my part and not spread anything, and to try to keep myself as safe as I could. But I was also dealing with it at the family level as well. During the shutdown, our little ice cream shop was still open, so we were still getting people coming in and out of the facility, and there was still that risk of possible contraction of the virus from any of us, from us being family members or us being employees and staff. At the very beginning of the shutdown, we didn't know what that would look like for the shop. We didn't know if we would be asked to shut down based on being a restaurant. We didn't know what that looked like. So also in March, being a consumer was also very hard because we couldn't find supplies to save our lives. I remember, I don't know if it was a Friday or a Thursday or what, but I remember driving home and I ended up hitting up a CVS where I was employed, the city that I was employed, basically looking for toilet paper. Not trying to hoard it, we literally just needed toilet paper because we were low. It was like a normal toilet paper shortage for our house. So I hit up the CVS in the city where I was employed at the time, and of course they didn't have any. They didn't have any sanitizer or Lysol products on their shelves at all. So that was a bust. On the way home, I ended up stopping at another CVS, and of course they didn't have toilet paper or sanitizer or Lysol wipes. And I'm smiling now. At the time, I was not happy. I was more panicking than anything, but it was just not fun. It was not a fun experience. And I think I ended up going to CVS because I think maybe a coworker or I had gotten word from someone or something that said CVS had like a supplier, their shipment came in or whatnot. So obviously you want to hit up the place that you think has it. So then I ended up going to a dollar store like right behind the CVS, the last CVS that I tried, and I was able to pick up one package of toilet paper. And yes, I only picked up one package. There were plenty to pick from, but I only got one because I was not one of those people. And unfortunately, I think in the entire month of March, so many stores were out of so many things, and I think that March was probably the hardest mental health month for me in regards to the pandemic. I would go into the stores, and from my perspective, I would walk in and I would see a lot of shelves empty. At some point, I walked in and it wasn't just toilet paper or Lysol that was gone. I mean, those things at the time were expected to not be there. But it almost got to the point where people were buying all of the bread. Like, there were certain supplies and necessities that were completely gone. And for me, it was scary because for me, it was my first experience feeling like I was almost in a war zone. Like, I can remember being in Walmart, and if you've been in Walmart, you know their long aisle of bread. And it was basically empty. Like, the only things that I remember being on that bread shelf were rolls. So April 2020 was actually when it started getting a little spicy for me. So I was still watching what I ate. I was still trying to cut back on the amount that I ate. I was still trying to be mindful of my health. I think it was maybe mid-April, out of the blue, I literally just started online dating. It was like the stupidest, best decision I've ever made in my life. I literally remember sitting on my couch, looking at Facebook dating, like the little app in Facebook dating, and I just decided to make myself a profile. No cares in the world that there was a pandemic, and no thought process in the fact that if I did match with someone, we wouldn't be going on dates for a very long time. I basically just started creating a whole bunch of profiles. In April, I ended up getting my first match, and we ended up talking for about a month into May. He was a pretty kind guy. Overall, I can say that I'm never going to forget some of the matches or people I've met during that entire first half of the online dating experience. Some were definitely interesting characters, and I say that with love, nothing but positivity towards them, and I hope that they're happy where they're at now, but just not something that I wanted to invest in. A lot of the people that I actually gave me a lot of stories to not only tell my friends and family, but maybe one day my kids and grandkids too. Anyway, so I matched with one, and we had talked through May. Unfortunately, due to personality differences, we didn't really work out. At the time, I was kind of heartbroken. I think the most important takeaway from March in 2020 for me was the fact that I had started online dating out of the blue. I hadn't dated someone for 8 years. I think that's why it kind of took me by such surprise that I just started an online profile, because I had such low self-esteem. I mean, I'm still working on a lot of stuff, don't get me wrong. But prior to setting up that profile, I had such low self-esteem, and I was not having it. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to deal with any heartache. I just wanted to keep to myself and be done. But I have to say that starting those online profiles, I ended up creating so much confidence in myself. And I mean, this might sound shallow and egotistical, but a lot of that confidence came from the fact that I ended up getting a lot of people who said they liked me, which yet again, coming from a person with such low self-esteem, thinking that other people can find you attractive is so mind-blowing, to say the least. April was kind of a pretty big confidence booster. May of 2020, Ohio was still shut down. I was still watching what I put in my body. I ended up not talking to that match anymore due to personality differences. So in May, I ended up matching with a very special gentleman on Plenty of Fish, which was one of the many profiles that I created for myself. And to kind of put it in perspective, I had forgotten I created a profile on Plenty of Fish. That's how me and Mr. B ended up matching, and it has been nothing but a positive experience. I can't help but smile. He's so special. You can't not love him, because he's just so sweet. He's so gentle. He's been nothing but a blessing and nothing but sunshine in my life since I've started talking to him. In addition to having matched with Mr. B, I also at that time had started seeing a life coach who has been a very great support in my life since, and we've definitely have a fun, friendly connection. And I enjoy talking to her. She is such a positive person, and she has given me so many different perspective changes, to say. And I won't say that she's completely caused it, but yet again, it's funny how when certain people come into your life, there are certain changes that come, and she's definitely sparked me at that time looking closer at my religious and spiritual beliefs. So that was something that I needed at that time, and it's something that I'm still taking a good look at. I grouped June through September because honestly those months were kind of a blur, which is weird to say because it literally just happened last year, but I don't remember. So June 2020, I was still watching what I ate, and I was still talking to Mr. B, and I actually started CrossFit with my previous supervisor, and boy was that a change. To kind of put into perspective, CrossFit was never something that I thought I could accomplish. I always looked at it as something that was super competitive, judgy, very taxing on your body, but needless to say, I would go like Monday through Wednesday, or at least try for like the first couple of months to make it somewhat regular. And like you could see the difference. And not only was I making physical changes, but yet again, I was making huge confidence strides. I remember several times where I've ended up like squatting or back squatting like over 100 pounds or about 100 pounds, like something I never thought that I would be able to do, and something that I never even wanted to try. But I was doing it. I ended up starting to see like a physical difference in my body. I would be lying if I gave you like a number of what I weighed before and after or during, because I didn't weigh myself at all. Like the biggest and the most noticeable changes were in the type of clothing that I could wear. Like I was starting to actually be able to purchase and wear things that I enjoyed and that I felt good in and felt fashionable in. And it was like the first time in a while that I actually felt like I could take pride in how I looked, and I felt good and I felt sassy. For the longest time prior to that, I was dressing like a slob. Like I didn't feel good in what I wore. I wore anything that I could put on my body and just rush out the door. And for the first time in a long time, I actually wanted to look good, and I actually bought dresses, something that I rarely ever put on because of the body confidence issues. CrossFit definitely helped build the confidence, and it definitely showed me that I can lose weight and I can look good and I can feel good. Somewhere between June and September of 2020, the shutdown finally ended. Family Shop was actually doing really well in business. 2020 was our second year for being in business, and we set so many personal records. It was ridiculous, you know, and I don't want to sound like I'm bragging because that's not my intent, but to put into perspective how well we did, we actually made a little bit of a profit, and that is absolutely wonderful. We were not expecting to even come close to a little bit of a profit until 5 years after being open. It gave us so much hope, and it just encouraged us to grow and strive for more. And of course, during that time, I still tried to meet with my life coach at least one time a month. So October is when it got a little spicy again for me. Granted, I was still doing the CrossFit thing, and I was still watching what I put on my body, and I was still seeing and taking in those results. But the biggest thing in September was the fact that I actually quit my big girl job. It was probably the best choice I could have made for myself. Prior to making this decision, I just was not happy. I mean, I enjoyed the people and I had fun with the people, but as a personal fit, it wasn't for me. Yet again, it's funny how certain things just kind of fall into place at certain times in your life. And October 2020 was one of those times. A lot of what made me leave was the fact that administration had started making choices that I couldn't agree with. Part of those choices did impact me directly, and it made me uncomfortable, and honestly, I'm thankful that they did make those choices because I would probably still be there and still be unhappy. So thanks. Having quit my job was, for me, in my highest good. And I say that because within a day after finding out that my role in the business was going to change, I had a plan to leave. And I had already decided that I was going to leave. My mom helped me plan it out. I think October 2nd is when my last day was. So starting off of October, I was out the door and it was great. So I was still talking to the mister in October, and for those who are new, I actually started my YouTube channel in October. I think my first video was October 10th or October 9th. Basically 1 week after my last day at my previous employment. And even October, COVID was still a thing. Obviously, we were encouraged to social distance, use masks, wash and sanitize our hands often. But there was no huge, I guess, changes in my life in October. And then November happened. Still talking to the mister. I kind of fell off the bandwagon of putting good things in my body and being mindful of that. So that's something that I'm gonna have to get back on. I haven't completely fallen off, but I've definitely kind of slipped back into my old ways, which is bad. Of course, being in the time of COVID, we ended up having a COVID Thanksgiving, which was very different than what I was used to. Typically, for Thanksgiving, prior to owning the business, we would host Thanksgiving at our house, and my dad's side of the family would come over, as well as my maternal grandparents would come over as well. Since owning the business, we would go to another family member's house and have Thanksgiving. This year, of course, the parade wasn't that great, which kind of made me sad because that was always one of my highlights of the year. And we just had a Thanksgiving with just me, my mom, my dad, and my maternal grandparents because we'd been around them previously and they haven't gone anywhere, and we were very careful as well. So in December of 2020, me and Mr. B were still talking, and I had finally gotten my first date in December with him. Well, to meet, we had our first date on December 12th of 2020, and it was wonderful. It was so much fun, like actually getting to interact with him in person. And the greater thing is the fact that he's still around. So kind of give you a little bit of a sneak peek of January of 2021. He's still around. Today is number 249 that we've kept in contact with each other. So we have not gone a single day without messaging each other at least once, which is really nice. So today is actually 249. And of course we had our COVID Christmas. Honestly, not a whole lot changed there. There were some things. My family and I typically go to our local church for Christmas Eve candlelight service. Unfortunately, that had been canceled this year. And typically we go to my dad's side of the family for Christmas, which we did not. Basically trying to keep everyone safe there. So Christmas was relatively normal for us, but there were still some changes that made it a little less enjoyable. But one positive thing is that we actually had time to hang out on Christmas. We weren't rushing around and driving each other crazy trying to get ready. We basically just enjoyed the day. We ended up opening up presents and just hanging with each other and then going over to my grandparents for dinner. So it was fun and it was enjoyable, and it was much slower paced than what I had ever experienced with at a Christmas, and it was great. Of course, in December, the shop was still doing well as well. Granted, because it was the winter months, things did start slowing down for us. Probably the most exciting part of December for me was the fact that I was actually able to make a list of manifestations and goals that I wanted to achieve in 2021. It was just fun sitting down and basically creating what I wanted 2021 to look like. Overall, I would say that my 2020 has been one of the best years that I've ever had. And I feel a little selfish saying that, but it's a truth. For me, 2020 overall was a really great year. It was a great year because I had lots of personal growth. I had experienced new things, and I had gained a whole lot of confidence basically from the online dating and from taking care of myself. And it was a good year for me, and it was a good year for our business. 2020 has only showed me what all can be accomplished in 1 year. I mean, a whole lot of stuff wasn't accomplished, but for the stuff that was, that's great. It was just a great year. All of the triumphs of 2020 has basically encouraged me to keep going. So I hope this recap of 2020 didn't really bore you. I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective from my life, and I just wanted to share what's in the works and to just kind of brag on myself a little bit. Like I said, I hope that you had a good holiday season. I hope that your 2021 has started off much better than 2020 ever was. And I will see you guys soon. Please remember to live faithfully, lead courageously, and to love unconditionally. See you next time. Bye.